As you wish. Let the mighty be humble.
Hello YouTube, Neuvillette is out, and I am here to provide you with the details on his numbers and teams and how good I think he is and where he fits into the meta. Neuvillette is an on-field HP scaling Hydro DPS slash hyper carry. Most of his damage comes from his charged attack, which will deal continuous AoE Hydro damage after spending several seconds charging it up. The charging time can be skipped by absorbing 3 sauce water droplets, which he creates by casting his skill and burst. His charged attack takes about 4.5 seconds to fully perform, but can be reduced down to 3.5 seconds. You do this by quickly releasing the charged attack button immediately after holding it. It is very important to get used to doing that, as it saves a lot of time over a full rotation. This charged attack will hit 8 times and apply Hydro 3 times over its full duration. His A1 and A4 passives improve his damage, A1 giving a multiplier to his charged attack scalings based on how many Hydro reactions your team triggered, and A4 giving damage bonus based on your current HP. With the buff from his A1, his charged attack scalings are very high. Over a full charged attack rotation, assuming you have 2 stacks of its passive, he will deal 144.7% HP scaling damage. With 3 stacks, that becomes 185.2%, which is about the same as Yelan's burst scaling from 7 burst procs, and Neuvillette does it in half the time that would take, so that's really high. Neuvillette ascends with crit damage while having an 88 crit damage weapon that gives 42% damage bonus, and he gets 36% crit rate from his artifact set, as well as 15% damage bonus from it. So all these combined means he has access to very high crit value, high multipliers, and high damage bonus. So far he is set up to be an amazing DPS, but let's analyze further to see if that holds up. Alright, so there were a few different teams I focused on with my C0 Neuvillette calculations. Double Hydro Hyper Carry, Freeze, Taser, Vaporize, and Hyper Bloom. The double Hydro Hyper team is Neuvillette, Kazuha, Child, Zhongli. Freeze is Neuvillette, Kazuha, Layla, Child. Taser is Neuvillette, Fischl, Kazuha, Zhongli. Vaporize is Neuvillette, Zhongling, Zhongli, Bennett. Hyper Bloom is Neuvillette, Raiden, Nahida, Zhongli. All of these teams are using a shielder. This is because Neuvillette is a ranged character, so he has innately very low interruption resistance. Plus, while using his charged attack, he cannot dash to dodge. He is capable of moving at somewhat decent speed during his charged attack, so it is possible to kite enemies and avoid getting hit, but the risk to reward ratio is just not worth it. If Neuvillette gets interrupted during a charged attack, you will have to start the attack up all over again, and you would have lost the sauce water droplets from that charged attack. This is way too punishing to be worth trying to play him without a shield. Double Hydro should theoretically be nice for Neuvillette because Hydro Resonance provides a really good 25% HP buff with permanent uptime. However, this team has one of the lowest DPS out of all of the Neuvillette teams I calculated. This is mainly because he doesn't work very well with other Hydro units. His field time is way too long to get good value out of Mona. You spend so much time charged attacking that Yelan and Xingqiu would get very few burst procs. So I actually found Child to be the best Hydro, because he provides a +1 talent level to your auto attack, which is actually pretty sizely increased to Neuvillette's damage. And this increase has full uptime, which is very nice since Neuvillette tends to take about 20 seconds of field time in his rotations. And we never actually swap to Child in this rotation. He just sits off field on the team and never goes on field ever, which cuts down on rotation time and makes easier setups. Hydro Resonance is a really good buff for Neuvillette with full uptime, but it's not really enough to make up for everything else this team is lacking, unfortunately. The next team I looked at was Freeze, which is basically just taking Zhongli out of the previous team and adding in Layla. Freeze can be nice because the crowd control from it can help ensure enemies stay within the radius of Neuvillette's charged attack. And Layla does good sub-DPS damage while having a very strong shield, but using her comes at the expense of Zhongli's resistant shred and buffing from Archaic Petra, so the team ends up being about equivalent, if not slightly weaker than the previous team option. So this is another team that I don't really recommend due to how much stronger some of the other options are. Now the Vaporize team has Neuvillette taking advantage of Zhongling's rapid pyro application to get Vaporize. It may feel weird to use Bennett when Neuvillette doesn't benefit from Bennett's buff at all, but Bennett is still necessary for Zhongling's energy as well as for her to do good damage of her own. Neuvillette not benefiting from Bennett can actually be used to our advantage. Since Neuvillette doesn't care about Bennett's buff, you don't need to stay within Bennett's burst, removing the circle impact issues that usually come with using Bennett. Now in this team, since Hydro is strong against Pyro, you will often end up with Hydro as the Aura and miss some Vaporize from Neuvillette. But this isn't a big deal because Vaporize lost in Neuvillette is Vaporize gained on Zhongling anyway. At C0, this Vaporize team ends up not being super strong, but it can be a nice team option to bring when you need to break Cryo Shields with Pyro. Taser in Neuvillette is where his team DPS gets excellent. Taser takes advantage of Electro Charge to swap both Electro and Hydro, allowing both Neuvillette and Fischl to do good damage, but also have Kazuha doing some good damage in AoE from Thralls and Electro Charged. Having 4 different elements on the team also lets Neuvillette get all 3 stacks of his passive, which is a very significant increase to his damage. Thanks to the grouping from Kazuha, this team should do great in both AoE and single target. The one thing to keep in mind is that this team has a very long rotation with a lot of swaps, so the rotation can be messed up pretty easily if you swap to the wrong character at the wrong time. And another team option for Neuvillette with really good team DPS is Hyper Bloom. You should be able to get about 19 Hyper Blooms in this team if you weave in some normal attacks on Neuvillette before each charged attack. Something unique that Neuvillette brings here compared to other Hyper Bloom teams is he has very high raw AoE Hydro damage, which is nice because AoE damage is something usually a bit lacking in Hyper Bloom. And since it's AoE, if he is just hitting multiple enemies marked by Nahida, you are going to get a lot more Hyper Blooms in AoE. Just keep in mind that there's no grouper here to help utilize his AoE. This team ends up with about equivalent team DPS to the Taser team, however this team has a much cleaner and simpler rotation, so you might find it better in practice. Now if Neuvillette is at C1, things change up a bit. Double Hydro, Hyper, and Freeze don't change at all. There aren't really any units worth using in place of Zhongli and Layla, so you don't actually get to take advantage of not needing a shield anymore. So since these teams are still far behind the other options, they are still not recommendable. Hyper Bloom also didn't change at all, not even gaining any damage. This is another team that doesn't have anything worth using over Zhongli. It also already has all 3 stacks of Neuvillette's A1 passive, which is why no damage was gained. However, keep in mind if you happen to have a C2 Nahida, this team will still be worth using. Vaporize and Taser gained quite a lot though. Since you no longer need a shield, Vaporize at C1 can replace Zhongli with either Kazuha or Nahida. Nahida provides the highest damage output out of all of these for Vaporize, thanks to her massive EM buff, as well as her Dendro application, also ensures that Neuvillette should always be the one vaporizing. Kazuha will also provide good damage while also providing grouping, which will be very nice in AoE scenarios. And then Taser also got a massive increase at Constellation 1. Since this team already had Resistance Shred from Kazuha, there was plenty to gain by replacing Zhongli. And for that, I replaced Zhongli with Child, using him entirely for Hydro Resonance and his +1 auto attack talent level passive. This is a very powerful team, but once again, Taser Neuvillette's only real downside is that the rotation is just so long and easy to mess up. So overall, Neuvillette's strongest teams have excellent DPS and stack up incredibly well compared to that of what other top DPS units do. And since I've mentioned Neuvillette C1 a lot, let's go over his constellations. Neuvillette C1 just might be the best C1 in the entire game. This constellation gives him a free stack of his A1 passive, and gives him infinite resistance to interruption during his charged attack. If the free stack takes him from 2 to 3 stacks, it will be about a 21% increase in damage. This is absolutely massive, especially for a C1. It is enough to take his teams from being fairly average to being legitimately competent with some of the strongest teams in the game. C2 is another really big damage increase, giving him 14% crit damage for every A1 stack he has. Since you will also have C1, this will basically always be 42% crit damage. C3 increases his auto attack talent level by 3. This is where almost all of his damage comes from, so this is another massive damage gain. C4 gives him an extra Source Water droplet every time he is healed on a 5-second cooldown. Neuvillette already makes enough droplets from his skill and burst, so this is a bit useless until Constellation 6. C5 increases his burst by 3 levels. His burst does decent damage, but it's a very small portion of his output at this point, so the increase from this is pretty small. Lastly, his Constellation 6 is incredible. The Constellation allows Neuvillette to continue absorbing droplets while using his charged attack, to get an extra second for its duration each time. This can result in him using his charged attack for up to like 11 seconds continuously, possibly even longer. On top of that, this Constellation also gives a coordinated attack that will hit twice at the same time during his charged attack, at 2-second intervals. The total damage increase you get from this is absolutely massive. So overall, Neuvillette's Constellations are absolutely incredible, and should easily be some of the strongest Constellations of any character in the entire game. As for his weapons, the two weapons you want to aim for on him are either the Battle Pass weapon, Sacrificial Jade, or his signature, Tomb of the Eternal Flow. My calcs show Tomb about 11% ahead of Sacrificial Jade, but keep in mind the difference is so large mainly because of the energy recharge subset saved by Tomb's energy refund passive. In teams and rotations with lower energy requirements, the difference will be much smaller than this. Also, with Sacrificial Jade, keep in mind it will lose its passive if you use Neuvillette on field for more than 10 seconds at a time, so you'll want to ensure you rotate around that, otherwise you will lose a massive amount of damage. If you can't access either of these two weapons, Blood of the Boundless Blue, Lost Prayers, Prototype Amber, and Widsith are the other options you can pick from. Now lastly, let's go over his artifacts. The Hunter set is what you absolutely want to use on him, and it is significantly ahead of other options. If you don't have the Hunter set, then 4 Heart of Death, or 2-piece HP, 2-piece HP, 2-piece Hydra options are what you can use. However, these alternatives are very behind Hunters, so you should only be using the alternatives temporarily until you get a good full Hunter set. As for the main stats, you pretty much always want an HP Sans. For the Goblet, you can use either Hydro or HP. Hydro is ideal, but it's only about 2 to 5% ahead, so if you have an HP Goblet with about 1 to 2 more crit substats than your Hydro one, it should be better. But if you're using a weapon with an HP % main stat, or if you're using Sacrificial Jade, you will want Hydro always. And for the Circlet, HP % actually comes out ahead of crit by about 1 to 4%, with the higher end being if he doesn't have Hydro Resonance. If you have C2, HP Circlet will be favored even further. However, if your weapon is Sacrificial Jade or an HP % weapon, you will still want a crit Circlet. Alright, now with all that said, let's review. Neuvillette's team DPS in his strongest teams is absolutely excellent, being higher than that of most other DPS units in the game, and he does it while being behind a comfortable Zhongli shield, while having excellent range and a good AoE, while also very often having a grouper. His Constellations and weapons also give him an excellent avenue for vertical investment. However, he gets one of, if not the biggest damage increases from having his signature weapon or an R5 Battle Pass weapon out of any DPS unit in the entire game. He will still be plenty good without them, he just might not feel super outstanding. Neuvillette's best team also uses 3 to 4 different limited 5-star units in them, so his teams can be considered expensive compared to that of other DPS units, so that's something worth keeping in mind. Overall, I think he very much deserves a spot in S tier. But if you are still considering pulling for him or not, as long as you think you will enjoy his gameplay, I think he is an excellent pull. And with that said, if you liked today's video, please be sure to give it a like and comment down below letting me know your thoughts. Please also feel free to join my Discord, where you can view my spreadsheets and communicate with me and our community directly. Thanks. Bye.